Hello, humans. This is just a little tangent that I went off on. Somebody recently asked me about castor oil. We were talking about making ointments and so forth, and they asked about castor oil. So I know that the plant is used in Chinese medicine, not commonly, but I decided let me research castor oil and see what I can find in Chinese medicine. So here's what I found. Castor oil, comes from the castor bean, which looks like this. And I found that actually one of the things I found is that it can be used as an oil for guasha, which we'll see a little bit later. And the person who recommends it, a Qing Dynasty doctor, was using it in treating epidemics. So before we talk about epidemics in Guasha, let's see what Li Shizhen has to say about it. Li Shizhen is this really famous Ming Dynasty doctor who wrote Bansao Gangmu, this huge, gigantic book that goes over all the herbs one by one. He has a few statements in it about how much he thinks castor oil is great for using for external use, not for internal use. He says, sorry, he said, oh, my cat is trying to bother me, but anyway. He says that in a Gao, it draws wind evils out of the body. So a Gao is like an ointment or a plaster or some kind of, thick thing that's applied externally to the body. And one thing I found interesting is when he says that it draws it out of the body, he uses this word ba, which is the same word in Bhagwan, which means cupping. So you know how cupping is supposed to suck wind evils out of the body. Mm, this, pulls things out in the same way cupping does. So in fact, if you want to do moving cupping, castor oil might be good for that too. If you're trying to, treat a wind condition with moving cupping. So this literally says draws out wind evils out to the outside, something like that. Um, so let's see. Yeah, so there are more pictures here of, the plant is, at least here in Southern California, it's an invasive weed. It's not a native plant, but it grows by the sides of freeways and at the heads of trails and in places where just nobody's caring for the land. It has gigantic star-shaped leaves that in the autumn have take on a reddish tint. And it has these seed pods that grow out of it. They're really kind of creepy looking. And they also turn reddish in the autumn. And so earlier in the year, they're green like this. And then, after a while, this green part dries out and kind of splits open. And then you've got this dried pod, and each of these pods has three seeds in it. You can kind of see here, one, two, three, but you still have to crack this open to get the beans that are on the inside. You should really know these beans are very toxic, and you should never take it internally unless you know what you're doing. Okay. Because it is toxic and yeah, it is used to make ricin. Is that how you pronounce that toxin that, people use in biological warfare and stuff like that? Anyway, um, so Lisa Jen also says castor oil can draw disease chi out of the body. So it's used in many kinds of ointments. So he's all for external use of this to pull out, bad stuff. And again, he's using that same word ba, which is the same word in Bhagwan, which means cupping, that draws things out, that sucks things out, that pulls things out. So, you would use this in certain situations and you wouldn't use it if there wasn't something you use it when you want to pull something out. So In Bantagangmu, Li Shizhen quotes all these other people, and then at the end of quoting other people, he'll tell you what he thinks. So this is a section, where he's talking and he's not quoting other people. He tells you how to make castor oil. I don't know if you want to try it, but the method of making so castor oil. So the castor plant is bima. It's the same ma as in ma huang or ma, which is sesame. So that word ma by itself means hemp often, but here it's a specific kind of plant. And so Bimajen is the seed or the bean, and Bimayo is the oil, because yo is oil, this yo. And so he says, take 5 sheng of Bimajen and pound it into a pulp. Okay, how much is 5 sheng? It doesn't really matter. Like you could use any amount. Would have to do some math to figure out how much was a sheng during the Ming Dynasty when he wrote this. But anyway, you take those beans that you've broken into small bits or maybe even ground, and then you boil it in 1 dough of water. So how big is a dough? I don't know. Anyway, you take the bimarin and the castor beans and you boil it in water and you keep skimming off the foam, but we're keeping the foam. Okay. And so continue until there's no more foam and then stop boiling. Remove the water and get rid of the water. You don't want the water. Then fry the foam until it doesn't pop when you drip it into a lamp. That's weird. But you know how like oil can burn. I don't really understand this. I haven't tried this, but you drip a little bit into a flame, and if it doesn't crackle or pop or explode, then that's a sign that it's done. Also, until a drop of it doesn't disperse in water. So that's kind of a thing. You want it to like bead in water instead of just kind of float and disperse throughout the water. You know how oil kind of separates on water. You don't want it to mix with water. So you're trying to, when you're frying it, you're trying to get all the liquid out, all the water out of it, because the foam still has some water from boiling. Maybe I'll try this sometime, but not tonight. Okay, so then you've got, you know, I don't know if that's going to look like, a pure oil or what, but that's his directions. Okay. Um, and then he tells you his experience. And here he's really talking. He keeps saying, that I did this. He says, here he says Shizhen. His name is Li Shizhen. Here he's saying Shizhen used this oil, and he goes on and on. He's talking from his own experience here. Someone was sick with hemilateral wind, which means one-sided paralysis. So maybe they had a stroke. He couldn't lift actually, I should fix this. Since it's one-sided, it would be he couldn't lift his arm or leg, singular. I'll have to fix that. Anyway, so Li Shizhen, I use this oil mixed with some other stuff. So this word here could mean sheep or goat. So this is like fat from, mutton or from goat meat. Which, when you heat up fat, it can melt if you do it right. Xiaxiang, which is musk, not Elon. And pangolin scales. No, pangolin is, almost extinct. But back in his time, it probably wasn't almost extinct, and they didn't understand that kind of idea. So you're mixing it with some various herbs. The shishang helps it to penetrate, and pangolin scales help move blood, and shishang also does. Anyway, so he boiled this down into a massage lotion. It has a word for massage. Where did it go? Here. This is the ma of Anma, if you're familiar with that. So anyway, and then this word is gao, which means an ointment or a lotion or something like that. So he boiled all this together into a massage lotion to rub in several times a day for this guy who's paralyzed on one side. After more than a month, he gradually recovered. At the same time, he was taking a prescription to search out wind. That means to get wind out of the channels in his arms and legs, transform phlegm and nourish blood. And he was well in 3 months. Okay, so that's good. The thing is, none of these ingredients are we likely to use today. But here's the idea is that he made a massage lotion. We could use other herbs from it that, remember, it pulls things out, including it pulls out wind. So since this person had wind in the channels and was therefore paralyzed, this massage lotion was formulated to pull wind out of the body through the skin. Yeah, from the channels into the skin and out of the body. And so that's a good idea. You wouldn't use it for massaging a patient who didn't have wind or some kind of evils, but anyway. Let's see the next one. Someone else had a swollen, painful lump on their arm. Li Shizhen, I also pounded castor beans into a paste and applied it. He recovered in one night. That's pretty good. Someone else was sick with a one-sided headache due to qi constraint. I pounded this together with rushang frankincense and table salt. So, he put some of the beans and some frankincense and some salt in a mortar, and he pounded it with the pestle, and then he heated it and applied it to taiyang, the point that's on the temples. While it was hot, he heated it up and applied it. So that, he couldn't have been making a large quantity of this because you only need enough to apply to the temples, to the one point, it's a one-sided headache, so maybe he only applied it on one side. He might only need 1 or 2 castor beans and then just a teeny bit of rushang and salt. The pain stopped in one night. He goes on. A postpartum woman's vagina did not retract. So, like when she gave birth, she had prolapse of the vagina, prolapse of the uterus, and it didn't go back in. So Li Shizhen, I pounded seeds and applied them to her dantian region, and it ascended in one night. That one's a little weird because we're not pulling wind out. But I found recipes, although I don't really know the source, they're modern sources. One recipe pounds bimadzi, this, castor bean, into a pulp and then applies it on baihui, do 20, and then does moxa on top to lift prolapse. And I've seen another recipe in an old book, but I couldn't find it when I was working on this. Where if somebody has retention of placenta and then you apply it on Yongchuan kidney 1, it will pull the placenta out, and then you have to wash it off as soon as the placenta comes out, the book says, or else it will keep pulling and it may make prolapse if you don't get rid of it as soon as so it really draws things towards it. On the head, it pulls prolapse up. On kidney 1, it pulls the placenta down and out. And so here, this is a little bit different on the dantian. I guess maybe that'll help pull it up. But anyway, okay. So he says, exterior use of this herb gets extraordinary results, but one cannot rashly take it internally. It is used in internal medicine, but it's one of those herbs in the category that makes violent diarrhea when somebody has like ascites and, really intense edema in the abdominal cavity or stuff like that, and it violently makes everything leave the body, and you can't overdo the dose because it is toxic. So people can die from eating these beans. So I don't really recommend it. And so it has been used internally. Uh, but he's, saying be real cautious with that. And then externally, he loves it. Okay. Oh, here's one more or a couple more. For unbearable headache due to wind chi. So remember, this pulls the wind out from the outside. Here's another picture of the plant. You could see these gigantic leaves and then these, stems that have all these seeds on it. And yeah. Anyway, so he's quoting from some earlier book, which he does quite a bit. And he says, applying flowers cut from castor oil paper to Taiyang is also effective. So apparently, maybe you've heard in the old days they used oil paper in the windows, because if you oil the paper, it becomes more translucent, so more light can go through, and it also might prevent some dampness from going through. So oil paper is a thing. And so here we're making oil paper with castor oil and then cutting out little, he says flowers, just a little, I mean, it could just be a little circle of castor oil paper and kind of stick them onto the Taiyang point to treat unbearable headache due to wind. Yeah. Okay, so that's what most of what Shizhen had to say about castor oil and a little bit about the beans. He has a whole lot of other stuff, but it's not as much about external application. It's not as relevant. When I would, then I started looking, Googling, not Googling, but like I went to this place that has like a lot of ancient Chinese books in electronic form, and I searched for castor oil. These are all in Chinese, of course. And a lot of it was just repeating what Li Shujian said and not much new and not much relevant. But I found this interesting thing. I've never heard of this author or this book before. So his name is Mr. Liu Kuei. And you can see he's Qing Dynasty, 1758. He wrote a book that's called Songfeng Shuo Yi. And so Songfeng, his name, he called him, so Chinese men often had lots of names, and he called himself the Pine Peak Hermit. So this just says Pine Peak, it doesn't say hermit, but I found out that one of his names is the Pine Peak Hermit. So, this is the Pine Peak Hermit's discussion, the word shuo, on epidemics. Yeah. Um, so the whole book is about treating epidemics, and therefore you should assume that everything we're reading here has to do with treating epidemics and not just, random stuff. But what I found is he's talking about Guasha. And you don't find a lot about Guasha in the old books. I think Guasha was really a folk therapy or a folk remedy. So a lot of scholarly doctors wouldn't do it. And, in addition to that, scholarly doctors didn't like touching the patient more than touching the pulse. They didn't like doing physical stuff. So acupuncturists would do a lot more physical stuff, and therefore they were lower status. Anyway, so this book is mostly about herbs, but he has this section on treating epidemics with guasha and acupuncture. I didn't translate the acupuncture part. He says there are four methods of scraping, which is gua. He doesn't actually use the term guasha, he just says gua, scraping. Um, One is using a clam shell. You can see that could make an okay guasha tool. You've got a big round side and a more sharp side if you need it. Using a porcelain cup, Yeah, depending on the shape of the cup, you could, use that. Although I think today besides actual guasha tools, we use those soup spoons. And using something that's called Mali. And I really couldn't find out what Mali is. I Googled in Chinese, I searched in a bunch of places, and I can't really find out what this Mali is. But this is the same Ma in Bima Ren, but it's also the Ma in hemp and in mahuang and in sesame. And he says, whatever this Mali thing is, it's only used for scraping the arms. And then the fourth method is using a copper coin. Okay. And yeah, you hear it called coining as well. So whenever you're scraping, you don't just do it dry, but you dip the tool in clear water or salt water or sesame oil, uh, to make it smoother. And so then he starts talking about epidemic stuff. I have seen epidemic patients be scraped with, this is weird, datsao. This is shaozao, like small datsao. So do they just literally mean a small one, or is this a specific type of zao? I don't know. I also Googled that, didn't come up with an answer. Anyway, so scraping with a small date that's been dipped in distilled alcohol. The scraping brought out purple clusters of bumps that looked like cooked mulberries. So here are mulberries. I couldn't find pictures of cooked mulberries, but you could imagine, like, wow, the dark blood. Um, and these are like clusters of bumps, and mulberries are pretty bumpy. Anyway, after they scraped, and then these bumps come out in somebody with an epidemic disease, then they lanced the bumps obliquely with a needle to break them open. And then they're going to bleed, you know, probably this really dark blood. Sorry, emergency alert, silver alert. Okay, okay, sorry. Um, I can look at that when we're done. We're almost done. Um, Alarm, alarm. Okay, so now my other phone is going off. Okay, so they lanced the bumps obliquely with a needle to break them open. And then after bleeding, they scraped again to bring out more bumps and lanced them. I'm not sure. I think probably they're scraping one area and then lancing it, and then they're scraping the next area and lancing it. I don't think they're re-scraping the same area, but it's not 100% clear to me. Anyway, then you keep doing it, and when you're done scraping, then you're done lancing. So the original idea of dipping a Zao date in alcohol is using fire to attack fire. So these epidemic evils, they're heat, they're high fever, but the alcohol is also fiery. And maybe it's a red date, which has some fire element in it. I don't know. But he says it's using fire to attack fire, and that's it. That's what it's doing. This dipping a Zao date in alcohol is not as good as dipping in this, castor oil, this bimayo to scrape, because that will help draw out the bad stuff. So if you don't have any, you can use ma juice. And so this is the same ma as in bima, as in castor. And then he clarifies that it is the same thing. If you don't have the oil, here's the quick and dirty method. Pound some bima ren, some castor beans, adding a little water, and then, strain off the solids and keep the thick juice. So, you're just basically grinding it with a little water and straining it. So that's the quick and dirty method for doing it. And so he says, I've often seen scraping and lancing used after waiting for the epidemic evils to enter the interior when the patient's already raving, delirious, and has, these more intense symptoms that they've already appeared. It's much better to use this method during the initial contraction of the disease. So, okay, so to summarize this, when somebody has an epidemic evil, this is not, he doesn't specifically say what type of epidemic evil, but you can do some guasha, and he prefers, even though there are other methods, he prefers that you do guasha with for epidemics, that you do use the castor oil. And then there should be these like red blood blister little things that you pop to bloodlet to let the bad stuff out, and then try to do that early rather than waiting until they're incredibly sick. So I found that interesting. And, with all these emerging diseases and with our FDA falling apart and everything like that, who knows what we'll see in the future? So you could file that in the back of your brain in case we need it later. Okay, that's my thing. Okay, goodbye.